The heavy reinforced glass of the Alpine Rehabilitation Clinic rattled violently against the storm, but I did not even realize I was in immediate danger until he grabbed my forearm. Hey guys, quick pause from the story. If you are listening to this right now, drop your city or country in the comments below. I love seeing where you are all tuning in from. All right, back to the lockdown. His grip was not painful, not aggressive, just an immovable force that stopped my momentum entirely as I was trying to rush toward the hydrotherapy wing. Wait, he commanded. That was the absolute first thing that registered in my brain. How incredibly calm and deep his voice sounded over the howling wind outside. Even with the harsh smell of ozone and freezing snow radiating off his tactical gear, his tone was not frantic like the emergency dispatchers, not panicked, just completely steady. I spun around, my boots slipping slightly on the polished medical floor, my mind racing to process the situation. "What are you doing in here?" I demanded. The man's piercing eyes darted over my posture rapidly, like he was scanning my physical condition for invisible fractures. I was wearing my standard issue medical scrubs, the thin fabric completely inadequate for the dropping temperature, my stethoscope still hanging uselessly around my neck, and under his intense gaze, I suddenly felt entirely exposed. "The structural integrity of the East Wing just failed," he stated flatly. I stared at him, my heart hammering against my ribs. "It did?" I asked, my voice betraying a slight tremble. "Yeah," he replied. The intense grip on my forearm eased a fraction, but he deliberately did not release me right away. "It could just be a microfracture in the foundation, or the whole roof could be slowly buckling under the snow load." That agonizingly silent pause where his heavy gloved hand remained wrapped securely around my arm felt infinitely longer than any standard emergency protocol dictated. Finally, he let his hand drop to his side. "Let me sweep the perimeter," he added, his tone leaving absolutely no room for argument. I took a shaky step back, my pulse doing an erratic rhythm that had nothing to do with the avalanche warning outside. "Yeah, of course. Do what you need to do," I managed to say. He moved right past me into the dimly lit physical therapy gym, as if he had memorized the blueprints, his heavy tactical boots thudding against the rubberized mats, carrying that sharp scent of high-altitude frost, and something deeper, something distinctly masculine and dangerous. "I am Julian, by the way," I offered, nervously rubbing the spot on my arm where he had grabbed me. He paused near the parallel bars, glancing back over his broad shoulder. "Gideon." Naturally, he looked exactly like a Gideon. He proceeded directly into the equipment storage area, his sharp eyes evaluating every corner, testing the seals on the reinforced windows. I leaned against a stationary bike, helplessly watching him navigate my workspace with an infuriatingly natural confidence, checking the resistance pulleys, running a gloved hand along the structural support beams. "You working a late shift?" he asked, his voice echoing slightly in the cavernous room. "Yes, finalizing patient charts," I answered. "Anyone else trapped up here with you?" he asked. "No, just me," I confirmed. He gave a sharp, single nod of his head, then stepped closer to the emergency medical station, pulling a tactical flashlight from his belt to inspect the ceiling vents. "Just residual wind draft causing the pressure alarms," he diagnosed. "These mountain facilities always have terrible air circulation dynamics." "Yeah," I muttered softly under my breath. It certainly felt like all the air had been sucked out of the room, but mysteriously, Gideon did not head for the exit. Instead, he advanced deeper into the rehabilitation center, moving past the traction tables and into the central gym floor. His sheer physical presence dominated the sterile medical environment in a way that made the large room suddenly feel claustrophobic, tightly wound, and hyper-aware. "You are the only specialist on this floor?" he pressed again, his gaze sweeping the shadows. "Yes," I repeated. He turned his head to look at me, holding eye contact for a solid second, like he was verifying a hidden truth. Good. That specific word hit the air between us with a strange gravity. Good? I echoed, my eyebrows drawing together. Means fewer casualties to worry about, he replied, a little too smoothly. But the distinct low timbre of his voice carried a weight that did not sound strictly like a search and rescue protocol anymore. I swallowed hard, forcing myself to push off the stationary bike and stand up straight. Right, obviously. Gideon moved to the massive bay windows next, peering out into the impenetrable blackness of the mountain storm. He unlatched a small ventilation panel, allowing a sharp blade of freezing air to slice through the stale, warm atmosphere of the clinic. Better, he murmured to himself. For several long minutes, neither of us dared to speak. The medical ward fell into an oppressive silence, broken only by the rhythmic hum of the backup generators. The chaos of the avalanche warnings and the blaring sirens felt like they belonged to an entirely different planet. In this isolated pocket of the facility, it was abruptly just the two of us. Gideon stood near the frosted glass, his broad back half turned toward me, his muscular shoulders completely rigid, as if his body refused to stand down from high alert. I could see the slow, controlled expansion of his chest beneath his heavy tactical vest, the way his strong fingers unconsciously flexed and released near his utility belt. Then, without any warning, he pivoted and locked his gaze straight onto my face, no longer scanning the architecture, just staring directly into my eyes. "Are you absolutely certain you are uninjured?" he asked softly. I bobbed my head up and down in a rushed, unconvincing motion. "Yeah, I mean, it is just a storm lockdown. I am used to it." "Not what I was asking," he countered smoothly. A knot of tension pulled tight in my stomach. "Oh." He closed the distance between us by one deliberate, heavy step. His proximity was not overtly hostile, nor was it explicitly inappropriate, but it completely obliterated the professional distance we were supposed to maintain. "I pull people out of wreckage all the time who swear they are completely fine," he explained quietly. "Adrenaline masks the pain, shock delays the panic, things like that." I released a shaky breath, desperately attempting to slow my racing heart. "I am perfectly fine, I assure you." Another suffocating silence stretched between us. He took another step closer. "You do not look fine, Julian," he observed, his voice dropping an octave. Something about the way he said my name, about how effortlessly he dismantled my professional composure, struck a nerve deep inside my chest. I let out a nervous, breathless chuckle. "Well, you just smashed your way into my locked ward, practically bruised my radius, and informed me the roof might collapse, so excuse my lack of enthusiasm." The corner of his chiseled jaw twitched in what might have been amusement. Fair point. And just like that, the heavy atmosphere shifted, tilting on its axis, yet the underlying pressure remained, because he still made absolutely no move toward the exit, and I still lacked the willpower to demand he leave. I should have pointed him to the stairwell. That is the exact moment that endlessly torments my thoughts when I replay that long night in my head. Technically, the immediate threat had been assessed. The structural beams were secure, the windows were holding against the blizzard, and Gideon had thoroughly cleared the zone. There was zero protocol requiring him to remain in my ward, but he lingered, and I stood frozen, allowing him to stay. He was still framed by the freezing draft of the window when I finally cracked the unbearable quiet. "So, is that the end of your sweep?" I asked, gesturing vaguely around the room. "No other imminent structural failures?" He took a slow, sweeping look around the gym, turning his head at a glacial pace as if he were deliberately stalling for time. "No," he finally declared. "Your sector is clear." Another heavy pause descended. "So you can report back to command, right?" I pushed, attempting a casual tone that failed miserably. His dark eyes snapped back to mine, pinning me in place. "Yeah," he answered slowly, but his boots remained firmly planted on the rubber floor. Instead of leaving, he casually strolled toward the staff break area, picking up a disposable cup from the water cooler like it was his own personal kitchen. He filled it, took a long, methodical drink, and then leaned his powerful frame against the medical counter, completely at ease. I openly stared at him, abandoning any pretense of politeness. "Do you always make yourself this comfortable in restricted medical facilities?" I asked, my voice wavering slightly. That managed to draw a genuine reaction from him, a dark, barely perceptible smirk playing on his lips. "Only when the resident doctor does not kick me out into the snow," he fired back. I huffed a short breath through my nose, shaking my head in disbelief. Fair enough, but my lungs felt restricted again, struggling to pull in enough oxygen. Gideon placed the plastic cup down, the tips of his fingers tracing the rim for a lingering second before he pulled his hand away. "Are you nervous, Doc?" he asked out of nowhere. The bluntness of the question completely derailed my train of thought. "What? No." "Yes, you are." "No, I am not." He tilted his head down, studying my posture with that exact same analytical, predatory focus. "You keep shifting your weight from your left leg to your right," he pointed out calmly. I froze instantly, suddenly hyper-aware of my own body mechanics. He was absolutely right. I scrambled for an excuse, shrugging my shoulders in a defensive gesture. "Well, you are still standing in my clinic." That statement triggered something in him. It was not explosive, but I distinctly saw the muscles in his neck tighten, as if my words had struck a target he had been guarding. "Do you want me to leave?" he challenged. And there it was, suspended in the air between us. The easiest question in the world, with the most obvious answer. My brain screamed at me to say yes, to secure the doors and go back to my paperwork. Instead, a heavy, suffocating hesitation gripped my throat, and that brief window of silence revealed far more than any spoken confession ever could. Gideon pushed his weight off the counter, his movements slow and predatory, closing the remaining space between us. He did not rush. He did not crowd me. He simply erased the safe distance I had been relying on. "You hesitated," he stated, his voice a low rumble. I swallowed hard, my throat sandpaper dry. Did I? Yes. The sound of my own pulse was deafening now, drowning out the raging blizzard outside. "It has just been an incredibly stressful shift," I deflected weakly. "Yeah," he agreed softly. "I am sure it has." He halted just inches away from me, so close that the ambient heat radiating from his large body easily overpowered the freezing draft from the window. Neither of us dared to breathe too loudly. A fundamental shift occurred in the room, an invisible electric current pulling us toward each other, entirely different from the emergency protocols of 5 minutes ago. He was no longer evaluating the room for danger. All of his intense, overwhelming focus was entirely concentrated on me. "Are you always this quiet?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Only when I am entirely unsure of what is happening," I confessed honestly. "And you are unsure right now?" I shook my head by a fraction of an inch. "No idea." Another agonizing pause stretched out. Then, dropping his voice even lower, he asked, "Do you?" The question hung heavy and dangerous in the air, because I instinctively knew that he did. Gideon was not lost in this moment. He was navigating it with precision. He exhaled a long, measured breath, reaching a gloved hand up to push his damp blonde hair back from his forehead, looking for a second like a man fighting a losing battle with his own discipline. Then his intense gaze locked onto mine with a burning clarity. Yeah, he admitted, and the raw honesty in that single word made my stomach completely drop out. Whatever line we were dancing around, we had just crossed it, and there was no retreating. I had absolutely no idea how he would proceed. A part of my brain expected him to laugh, to shake his head, to blame the adrenaline and march out the door. But Gideon did none of those things. He remained rooted to the floor, standing so intimately close that I no longer had to guess what was running through his mind. I could read it in the darkness of his pupils. "You are overanalyzing the situation, Doc," he murmured. I let out a trembling breath. "That is highly probable, but your analysis is not wrong." That specific sentence caused my chest to constrict painfully. I looked up at him, truly taking in his features for the first time without the lens of panic. The exhaustion lines bracketing his mouth, the intense, unwavering focus in his eyes, the rigid set of his broad shoulders, indicating that this sudden loss of control was just as terrifying for him as it was for me. "Pointing that out is not helping my anxiety," I managed to whisper. A genuine, small smile finally broke across his face. "Yeah," he acknowledged quietly, "I am fully aware." The silence that followed was different, heavily saturated with intent and anticipation. "Do you do this often?" I blurted out before my brain could censor the terrible question. "Do what?" "Linger around," I clarified, "after the emergency is contained." His expression shifted, dropping the smirk, leaving only a stark, striking honesty. "Never." "Then why are you doing it right now?" The weight of that question felt physical, pressing down on my shoulders. For a terrifying second, I thought he was going to ignore it and walk away. Instead, he closed the final gap, his tactical vest brushing lightly against my scrubs. "Because you silently begged me not to walk out that door," he stated, his voice a gravelly rumble. My mouth went completely dry. "I absolutely did not." "You hesitated," he interrupted, his tone completely void of arrogance, just armed with undeniable truth. I let out a long, shuddering sigh, dropping my gaze to the floor for a brief second, before forcing myself to meet his piercing stare again. "Yeah," I confessed, the word tasting like defeat. "I did hesitate." Silence. A thick, intoxicating silence. Gideon gave a single, firm nod, accepting my surrender. "Then do not stand there and pretend you did not mean it." That hit me harder than a physical blow. He had completely dismantled my defenses, and I desperately hated how effortlessly he read my mind. I dragged an unsteady hand through my hair, taking one tactical step backward to preserve my sanity. "This is entirely insane," I muttered wildly. "A little bit, yeah. You are literally standing in my ward because the mountain is collapsing. Factually correct. And now you are just hovering in my personal space. Also factually correct." I let out a harsh, disbelieving laugh, shaking my head. "Okay, when you list the facts like that, it sounds completely normal." He finished the thought for me. "No," he corrected smoothly, "it sounds significantly worse." That actually pulled a real, deep chuckle from his chest, a sound so rich and warm it temporarily shattered the tension. But the relief was violently short-lived. The heavy, magnetic pull snapped right back into place, wrapping around us, tighter this time, unescapable. Gideon stared down at me, the lingering amusement vanishing from his face, replaced by a dark, consuming intensity. "If you explicitly instruct me to leave this room, Julian, I will walk out right now," he promised. There it was, the final exit, the ultimate test of my willpower. I hesitated. Again. And this time, there was no sweeping it under the rug. His eyes dropped to my lips for a fraction of a second before snapping back up to meet mine. "You keep doing that," he whispered. "Doing what?" Refusing to give me an answer. I swallowed thickly, because I do not have a clue what the correct answer is supposed to be. His expression softened, just the slightest relaxation around his eyes. "Yeah," he countered softly. "You know exactly what it is." That quiet, unwavering confidence in his voice did something catastrophic to my nervous system. Deep down, I did know. I was just terrified of the consequences of admitting it out loud. So, acting purely on adrenaline, I asked the most dangerous question possible. "What exactly happens if I refuse to tell you to leave?" The pause that followed was deafening. It was the absolute point of no return, the edge of the cliff. Gideon held my gaze, his face a completely unreadable mask for 3 agonizing seconds. Then, "I stay." 2 simple words, but the absolute conviction behind them made my heart violently slam against my ribcage. This was no longer a game of hypotheticals. I needed to say something. Tell him to get out. Tell him about professional ethics. Tell him anything. Instead, I stood completely paralyzed, staring up at him like a drowning man waiting for a rescue line. And Gideon made the decision for both of us. The instant I failed to reject him, he moved. Not with speed, not with aggression, but with an inevitable, crushing certainty. He stepped entirely into my space. The distance between us vanished, replaced by the overwhelming heat of his body, the rough texture of his tactical gear, and the intoxicating scent of winter and sweat. "You are still not ordering me out," he noted, his voice vibrating in his chest. My throat felt as if it were closing up. "I know." "Why?" I exhaled a slow, shaky breath, my hands trembling slightly at my sides. "I really do not know," I whispered honestly. His dark eyes searched my face relentlessly, calculating the exact level of my resistance. "Yes, you do." That infuriating certainty again, like he possessed a map to my internal thoughts. I shook my head slowly, a pathetic attempt at denial. "You are making this incredibly difficult." "How?" "By operating under the assumption that you know exactly what is going on in my head." "Maybe I do know," he challenged softly. That sent a violent shiver directly down my spine. I let out a breathy, nervous laugh. "You are guessing." He did not smile. "Then look me in the eye and tell me I am wrong." Total silence. I physically could not form the words, and we both were acutely aware of it. Gideon's jaw clenched tight, recognizing his victory. His large hand twitched near his belt, his knuckles turning white as if he were fighting an agonizing internal battle against his own instincts. "You feel this exact same pull," he stated. It was a statement of absolute fact, which made the reality of it terrifying. I swallowed hard, the roaring of my own blood deafening my ears. "This is a complete violation of protocol." "Yeah," he agreed in a low murmur. "It definitely is. But you are still standing here." "Yeah." "And I'm still allowing you to stay." "Yeah." We fell into a charged silence. Voicing the reality of the situation stripped away the last layer of deniability. Gideon shifted his stance, his gaze dropping to my mouth again, lingering longer this time, sending a sharp spike of heat straight to my core. "You desperately want me to walk away," he murmured, testing the waters. I opened my mouth to speak, but the words died in my throat. His exhale was a slow, ragged sound of tightly controlled restraint. Or maybe you do not, he added darkly. That sentence landed like a physical weight on my chest. The truth was violently exposed, sitting right between us, waiting for someone to claim it. I looked up at him, my defenses entirely shattered. What exactly do you want, Gideon? The exact moment the question slipped past my lips, the entire atmosphere in the room ignited. The danger escalated from a simmering tension to a roaring fire. This was no longer a debate about his physical presence. It was a confession of intent. Gideon did not rush to answer. He held my stare, his dark eyes burning with an intensity that made my breath catch. And then he closed the final fraction of an inch between us. We were so close that the rise and fall of his chest brushed against my scrubs. Are you absolutely certain you want to ask me that question? He warned, his voice a low, dangerous growl. My lungs seized. I just did. The silence that stretched out was heavier, thicker, and far more dangerous than before. The game was over. Gideon tilted his chin down, observing my face like a predator giving its prey one final, fleeting chance to run. I held my ground. And that was the exact moment his restraint snapped. His voice dropped to a devastatingly rough whisper. I want to stay right here, he confessed. Not a casual remark. A deep, primal admission that made my chest cave in. And? I whispered desperately, pushing him over the edge. He did not blink. He did not hesitate. And I am entirely convinced that you do not want to stop me. That was the killing blow. He was completely right, and the most terrifying part was that I was no longer trying to hide it. I am not sure what gave way first, my crumbling willpower or the microscopic space separating our bodies. Because after he spoke those words, neither of us took a step back. That was the final answer. My chest burned from the lack of oxygen, but instead of retreating, I unconsciously swayed forward, leaning into his gravitational pull. Gideon noticed immediately. His eyes flicked down to my lips, and this time they stayed there. That tiny, deliberate focus sent a jolt of pure electricity straight down my spine. You are not pushing me away, Julian, he whispered, his breath ghosting over my skin. It was not a question. It was a deeply satisfying realization. I swallowed thickly. You are not exactly giving me the physical space to do so. A dark, triumphant look flared in his eyes. Move back, then, he challenged softly. I remained completely frozen. One agonizing second passed, then a second one. That was the breaking point. Gideon's heavy, gloved hand rose slowly, deliberately, hovering just a fraction of an inch over my hip, giving me one final, screaming opportunity to flinch or pull away. I stood my ground. His fingers finally made contact, gripping the fabric of my scrubs and the skin beneath it. His touch was firm, grounding, and shockingly hot. My breath hitched violently in my throat. That tiny sound was all the permission he required. His grip hardened, pulling me flush against his heavy tactical gear. You are still not stopping me, he murmured, his voice incredibly rough. I know, I breathed out, and the world tipped over. The moment the words left my mouth, he eliminated the final millimeter of space. It was not a frantic collision. It was a devastatingly precise strike. His free hand slid up to grip my jaw, his thumb dragging roughly over my cheekbone, tilting my head up to meet him. And then his mouth crushed against mine. My brain instantly short-circuited. The blaring sirens, the freezing wind, the entire medical facility simply ceased to exist, leaving nothing but the overwhelming sensation of his lips moving against mine. The kiss was not desperate or sloppy. It was masterful, completely controlled, yet dripping with a dark, terrifying intensity. He kissed me like a man who knew exactly how to dismantle someone, holding back just enough of his crushing strength to see if I would shatter. I should have shoved him back. I should have screamed. Instead, my hands flew up, desperately grabbing the heavy fabric of his tactical vest, pulling him even closer, leaning entirely into his consuming heat. The instant I kissed him back, a violent tremor ran through his massive frame. His grip on my jaw tightened painfully, a rough, demanding hold that confirmed he was done playing games. He deepened the kiss, his tongue sweeping into my mouth with a confident, ruinous authority, obliterating any lingering illusion that this was a mistake. I clung to his vest, my knees trembling so violently I thought I might collapse if he let go. A low, ragged groan tore from his throat, vibrating against my lips, and suddenly he was backing me up, his heavy boots marching forward until my spine hit the edge of the medical counter. We stayed locked together in that frantic, consuming embrace for what felt like hours, drowning in the sudden, violent collision of our bodies. Time entirely lost its meaning. Finally, he tore his mouth away, breaking the kiss but refusing to step back. He hovered mere inches from my face, his chest heaving violently, his dark eyes completely blown out and wild. "Are you okay?" he rasped, his voice unrecognizable. That specific question, asked while I was still pinned against the counter by a tactical operator, should have broken the spell. Instead, it cemented the terrifying reality of what we had just done. I nodded frantically, my lungs burning for air. "Yeah." His thumb stroked my jawline, a surprisingly gentle movement that contrasted sharply with his heavy breathing. "Do you still want me to leave?" he asked, the words heavy with a new, dangerous meaning. I shook my head immediately. "No." The moment that single syllable left my mouth, the entire trajectory of my life permanently altered. There was absolutely no returning to the professional doctor I was 20 minutes ago. I assumed the situation would violently escalate, but surprisingly, the frantic energy slowly bled out of the room, leaving a heavy, intoxicating intimacy in its wake. Gideon did not ravage me again. He remained flush against my body, his heavy hands resting firmly on my hips, his forehead dropping to rest against mine, as we both fought to regulate our breathing. He was deliberately giving me the space to process the shock, to decide if this was a momentary lapse in judgment or the beginning of a catastrophe. "You are absolutely sure?" he pushed, his voice a gravelly whisper. I nodded against his forehead, my hands still gripping his vest. "Yeah, I am sure." He held my gaze for an eternity, his dark eyes searching my soul for any trace of regret. Finding none, he slowly, reluctantly, took a half step back. The sudden rush of cold air between our bodies felt like a physical deprivation. I let out a long, shaky breath, dragging both hands through my messy hair, trying to anchor myself back to reality. "Okay," I whispered into the quiet room. Gideon stood completely still, watching me like a hawk, the coiled tension in his muscles proving he had not mentally stepped away. "Okay," he echoed softly. I let out a breathless, awkward laugh. I genuinely did not see that coming. "Yeah," he agreed, a faint smirk returning. "Neither did I." The heavy silence settled over the clinic again, but the suffocating tension was gone, replaced by a raw, vibrating connection. I leaned my weight back against the sterile counter, desperate for physical support. "Do you make a habit of doing this with random civilians after a rescue?" I asked, a sudden spike of defensive insecurity lacing my tone. Gideon immediately caught the shift in my voice. "No," he answered instantly, his tone razor sharp. I looked up, meeting his intense stare. "Then why me?" That massive question dropped like a boulder between us. He did not scramble for an excuse. He looked around the dimly lit medical ward, as if anchoring himself to the environment, before his eyes snapped back to mine. Because you did not feel like a random civilian, he confessed, his voice brutally honest. I furrowed my brow, confusion warring with the flutter in my chest. You spoke to me for exactly 3 minutes. Sometimes 3 minutes is all it takes to know, he fired back effortlessly. I shook my head, a disbelieving smile fighting its way onto my face. That is completely illogical. It does not require logic, Julian. Another heavy beat of silence. I pushed off the counter, taking a slow, deliberate step back into his orbit, hyper-aware of the danger I was courting. So, what exactly happens now? I asked, addressing the terrifying aftermath of crossing the line. Gideon studied my face, his sharp mind clearly running through a dozen different tactical scenarios. Now, he started, his voice rumbling, then abruptly stopped. For the absolute first time since he breached my door, he looked genuinely uncertain. That fleeting vulnerability did more to unravel my defenses than his dominant confidence ever could. You tell me what happens now, he challenged softly. I let out a long, slow sigh, typical, throwing the tactical decision back onto the civilian. I glanced sideways at the reinforced glass, watching the furious blizzard violently thrashing the mountain, trapping us together in this suspended reality. We definitely cannot pretend that did not just happen, I stated firmly. No, we cannot, he agreed immediately. And you are technically still on an active emergency deployment. The corner of his mouth quirked up into a devastatingly handsome smirk. Technically, yes. I shot him a stern, reprimanding glare. Gideon. Relax, Doc, he commanded gently, the amusement bleeding into his deep voice. The evacuation transports are struggling to navigate the ice. I have a solid window of time before command recalls my unit. A solid window of time, I repeated softly, the words hanging in the air. Yeah. Suddenly, the infinite night felt agonizingly finite. The realization that this contained bubble was temporary, that a ticking clock was hovering over us, magnified the intensity of every single second. I took another step forward, completely abandoning my professional hesitation. Then I suggest you do not waste my time, officer, I whispered bravely. His entire demeanor transformed in a fraction of a second. The relaxed amusement vanished, replaced by a hyper-focused, predatory intensity. He realized instantly that I was no longer a victim of circumstance. I was actively participating in the danger. He did not immediately reach for me. Instead, he scrutinized my expression, ensuring I understood the gravity of my invitation. You are logically analyzing this, he noted quietly. Yes, I admitted without shame. Good. That completely surprised me. Good? Yes, good. It means you are not just blindly reacting to adrenaline. I exhaled a shaky breath, glancing down at his heavy boots before looking back into his dark eyes. I never do things like this. Break the rules. Me neither, he stated firmly, and because of his unwavering tone, without a hint of deceit or manipulation, I believed him entirely. That realization made the situation infinitely heavier. Somewhere in the distance, a muffled radio crackled to life, the harsh static a violent reminder of the chaotic world waiting outside these doors. Gideon heard it too. The muscles in his thick neck locked tight, reality threatening to rip him away from me. My window is closing fast, he muttered, a trace of genuine frustration in his voice. I know, I replied, my voice shrinking. The fiery energy between us shifted, cooling into something deeply serious and grounded. Gideon took a reluctant step backward, rubbing a gloved hand aggressively against the back of his neck. Listen, Julian, he started, struggling to find the words. What just happened? This is not a situation I am going to walk away from and pretend I forgot. I blinked, momentarily stunned by his blunt honesty. I really did not think you were that kind of man. Good. Another loaded pause. He jerked his chin toward the heavy steel doors. I need to report back to command before they send a search party for me. There it was, the inevitable conclusion. But strangely, it did not feel like an ending. I crossed my arms defensively over my chest, fighting the sudden, painful, hollow feeling in my stomach. So, that is the end of the line? I asked quietly. He locked his intense gaze onto me, absolutely zero hesitation in his eyes. Not even close. Then, what is the protocol? I challenged. Gideon reached into a specialized tactical pouch on his thigh, pulling out a heavy, ruggedized smartphone. He paused for a fraction of a second, as if acknowledging the massive weight of this simple action, and then thrust the device into my hands. Input your personal number. No games, no smooth lines, just a direct order. I took the heavy phone, my fingers trembling slightly as I quickly typed in my digits, and handed it back. Our fingers brushed against each other for a fleeting second, a tiny spark of heat reminding me of the crushing weight of his body against mine. He stared at the glowing screen, burning the number into his memory, then looked back up at me. I am going to call you, he promised. It was a vow. I nodded, my throat tight. Okay. A long, agonizing beat of silence. Neither of us wanted to break the invisible tether. Finally, he forced himself to turn toward the exit, his large hand gripping the heavy metal handle. But just before he pushed the door open, he stopped, turning his head to look at me one last time. Hey, Julian. Yeah? That hesitation of yours, he referenced smoothly. A dark, knowing look flashed across his rugged features. Next time I see you, do not fight it so damn hard. My stomach executed a violent backflip. Next time? I repeated breathlessly. He pushed the heavy door open, allowing the freezing, chaotic roar of the mountain storm to violently rush back into the silent clinic. Yeah, next time. And just like that, the tactical operator vanished into the dark, freezing corridor, leaving me entirely alone in the sterile room, surrounded by the faint smell of winter ozone and the overwhelming, terrifying certainty that my life had just irrevocably changed. I absolutely did not sleep a single minute that night. I lay rigidly on the uncomfortable cot in the staff break room, staring blindly at the acoustic ceiling tiles, obsessively replaying every single microsecond of the encounter. The blaring alarms, the shattered glass, the sheer physical dominance of his entrance, and then the terrifying way he cornered me, the way he looked directly into my soul, and the devastating reality that I had surrendered without a fight. I rolled onto my side, dragging an exhausted hand aggressively down my face, letting out a frustrated groan. Next time. His deep, gravelly voice echoed endlessly in the quiet room. A tactical operator does not make a promise like that if he is planning a casual retreat. He was establishing a perimeter, marking his territory. And the most pathetic, terrifying part of all, I was desperately waiting for his next move. The morning sun finally crested the mountain peaks, violently bright as it reflected off the fresh avalanche snow, stabbing through the clinic blinds. The daylight made the entire memory feel shockingly real, stripping away the protective cover of the dark storm. I slowly pushed myself off the cot, my muscles aching with phantom tension, and began my morning medical routine with the clumsy slowness of a man severely concussed. Strong black coffee provided zero relief. A scalding hot shower in the staff locker room failed to wash away the lingering sensation of his heavy hands on my hips. Every time my brain experienced a second of downtime, it violently snapped back to Gideon. I knew absolutely nothing of substance about the man. I knew his name, the crushing weight of his physical strength, and the terrifying fact that he possessed zero hesitation when he wanted something. And somehow, that terrifying combination was enough to completely hijack my nervous system. My personal cell phone aggressively vibrated against the metal counter. I physically flinched. For a solid 10 seconds, I just stared at the glowing screen like it was an unexploded bomb. Then, my trembling fingers snatched it up. Unknown number. My lungs instantly seized. I swiped the screen open. Gideon. Are you awake, Doc? Short, demanding, and incredibly simple. I stared at the text message, my brain paralyzed by the weight of a simple reply. Replying meant acknowledging the absolute chaos he had brought into my life. I quickly typed, Julian. Yeah, I am. The typing bubble appeared almost instantaneously. Gideon. Good. That was the entire message. One word. And yet it caused a massive adrenaline spike in my bloodstream. I slumped heavily against the counter, closing my eyes and exhaling a shaky breath. How exactly does one casually respond to a tactical operator who hijacked your brain? Before I could formulate a safe reply, the phone buzzed again. Gideon. My deployment ends in 20 minutes. Okay, that was a direct escalation. That meant he was actively hunting for me. My thumbs hovered over the digital keyboard, completely unsure of the tactical play. Julian. Okay, and? The three dots of his typing indicator danced on the screen, vanished, and then rapidly reappeared. It was the absolute first time I had witnessed him hesitate. Then the message dropped. Gideon. I meant every single word I said last night. My stomach bottomed out completely. He was not playing around. He was not offering an excuse about the adrenaline or the danger. He was doubling down. I swallowed the thick lump in my throat, glaring at the device. Julian. Regarding what exactly? I knew exactly what he meant. I just needed the absolute confirmation. A few agonizing seconds ticked by. Gideon. Regarding the fact that there will absolutely be a next time. There it was. The final nail in the coffin of my professional, quiet life. Clear, devastatingly direct, and leaving absolutely zero room for misinterpretation. I let out a long, ragged breath, my knuckles turning white as I gripped the phone. The game had permanently changed. This was no longer about a desperate, panicked kiss during a mountain lockdown. This was a deliberate, calculated pursuit. I rapidly typed, deleted, and aggressively typed again. Julian. Are you always this terrifyingly straightforward? His response was chillingly fast, as if he had been waiting for the exact question. Gideon. Only when I have locked onto my target, Julian. And that response completely destroyed me. There was absolutely zero hesitation, zero doubt, zero mercy. And as I stood alone in my brightly lit clinic, staring at the screen, that same dark, consuming pull I felt in the dark dragged me under again. Only this time, I was fully aware of the danger, and I was willingly walking straight into the fire. I am so curious to hear your thoughts on this, guys. What would you have done if a massive tactical operator cornered you in a locked ward? Would you have pushed him away? Or would you have surrendered like Julian did? Let me know your honest opinions in the comments down below. And please don't forget to like and subscribe for more intense stories like this one.